Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Jamie Weinstein Show. And what a fiery episode I have for you today. My guest is Ed Schultz. But before I get to the episode, of course, I'm going to ask you first to go to iTunes and rate the show. That's something I ask every week, and something that remains very important for shows like this. Please give us a 5-star review if you like the episodes and interviews we are putting out week in and week out. You can also go to Twitter and tweet at me at Jamie_Weinstein. Tell me what you think of the show, guests you'd like to see on the show, questions you'd like me to ask future guests. So that would be appreciated. All engagement is good engagement. Now to today's episode with Ed Schultz. You probably remember him as the host of an MSNBC show for many years. He was in radio broadcasting at a radio show for a long time, left of center figure. Now at RT, you might know it better as Russia Today, but it goes by RT these days, RT America, where he is the host of a newscast. We got into that, to say the least. This show focuses a lot on Ed at RT and whether he is influenced by the fact that his show is funded by the Russian government. RT is been criticized and legislated against as a propaganda tool of the Russian government. Ed, of course, denies all of this, but we get into a pretty heated exchange at points about why it seems like he has changed his views on certain things and his view of Russia and Putin and Trump. So we get into all of that, and I really think you're gonna find the episode interesting. I will say that Ed, after the show, emailed me and he said, I'll read it to you. Jamie, I enjoyed the interview, although I felt you came in here to prove a point. You seemed unwilling to accept my answers, bordering on expecting only the answer you were looking for. So I'm going to let you determine whether I was fair or unfair to Ed. My view of RT is that it is a tool of the Russian government to, propagandize in America, but really to try to create undermined our understanding, our belief in our institutions in this country. I don't think it's particularly successful, but I think that is the intent of the network. I should note that back in my early days, and I'm sure you can find videos of this and pictures of it online, I used to go on an RT show called Tom Hartman's RT show, another liberal radio host who had a show there. I was well aware that RT was state-funded propaganda. In fact, I often used to say things that made it clear that it was state-funded propaganda, even when I was on the show. In fact, I think that's probably what led me to not being invited back down as we continued on, and I continued to do it on the show. But there is a debate whether people should even engage and go on the network, even if they recognize it is propaganda, to fight the propaganda, to provide an alternative view of America, which I like to think I tried to do when I was on. But the counter-argument is that you're lending legitimacy to RT. So I think that's a fair counter-argument, and I actually raised that with Ed, that one of the claims is that they actually hired people like Ed Schultz and Larry King and others who are well known in America to give them legitimacy as they use the Kremlin funds to advance their agenda in America. But anyways, I will let you decide for yourself what you think of the episode. We get into a bunch of different topics, but it does focus pretty heavily on Ed's time at RT. So without further ado, I give you Mr. Ed Schultz. Ed, thank you for joining the Jamie Weinstein Show.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Well, we are sitting here in, I think, RT's Washington Bureau. I see you have a camera up here filming you as well. Let me begin where I've begun with most of the guests I've talked to recently. We are just a little over 1 year into the Trump administration. Have you been surprised in any way?
Well, actually, I haven't, because I knew that he was unconventional, out of the mold, something Washington has not had, certainly in my lifetime. Every president in my lifetime has come from government. This guy comes from the private sector. He comes from global business operations. He was an international figure in the business scene in the financial world before he came to the White House, before he got into the campaign. And so I knew that it was going to be unconventional, hard to predict. You could see that with his personality on the campaign trail, that this was really going to be something different. And I think the mainstream media has had a hard time accepting the fact that he is different, and that the comparisons that they have of him are to other presidents. I mean, he has, whether you say lowered the bar or raised the bar when it comes to presidential behavior or expectations, that's to be determined individually by every voter. But so far, I think the measurement is that his base is very strong, and his base is turned in from voters to believers to followers. And I think that he gets a lot of criticism for his tweets, but I think his base loves it because it filters out, any interpretation by the mainstream media or anyone else, and it goes directly to the voter. And I think that there's a real good portion that's underestimated of people that do like the fact that he does that.
Have you ever had an opportunity to meet him, maybe during your MSNBC days when he had a show on NBC? And if you did meet him, is there anything that you learned that you can help us understand who Donald Trump is?
To be perfectly honest with you, when I was at MSNBC, I met a lot of people all over the country, but that is one person I did not meet. I referred to him a number of times in interviews, but I never felt like I needed to meet Donald Trump, or I never went out of my way to meet him. I didn't have anything against him. Our paths never crossed. And I was in the cable world. He was at a totally different business level than where I was.
But I ask sometimes because I've talked to a lot of people in cable news, and he sometimes would call people after the show. He would see a show, call them, either disagree with them, yell at them, or discuss what he liked about them. And you never had any experience.
I never had any interaction with Donald Trump in that regard. He never called me after doing any shows. I did reference him one time when he was thinking about running for president. I did make the comment that I thought that Donald Trump would know more about creating jobs than anybody else, because he understood Wall Street, he understood negotiations, he understands payroll, he understands the business climate much better, and I thought that he would be, very strong in that regard as far as job creation. And at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, he was in the red line or walking in, and a reporter asked him and said, Ed Schultz said that you would know more about creating jobs than anybody else. And he says, I think Ed Schultz is right. So that's the,
Well, so let's go
that's
back.
the only contact I ever had with Trump. So I guess he knows who I am, but I've never really made it a point to make sure that I get in front of him.
So let's go back, actually, to when he entered the primary. And I've asked this to a lot of people. What was your initial reaction when he, did that, as he calls, the famous escalator ride down Trump Tower and announced that he's running for president? What was your view of him when he jumped in?
Well, it's interesting you asked me that because I was there. And I also took a couple of my MSNBC producers with me at the time. And I think that there was an element of astonishment by the media people that were there. I ran into George Stephanopoulos, and he said, do you believe this? I said, well, yeah, he's coming down the escalator, And when it was all over with, when he did his speech and it went on for a while, I thought, first of all, I had never been exposed to Ivanka Trump. I thought her introduction of her father was just absolutely outstanding. And I thought, well, she's going to play a big part in all of this. She's too well-spoken and too well-versed. That was my first impression. Then when I heard Trump talk, I absorbed it all, and we were walking out of the building and walking down Fifth Avenue, and I turned to my executive producer, James Holm, and I said, homie, he just won the middle of the country. I knew that Trump was stepping on something that, number one, no other candidate would. He was speaking the truth. There were a lot of things that he said about illegal immigration that were on the mark. And I thought that it was going to resonate with a lot of people in America, and that was the hot-buttoned issue, and it put him on the map as a candidate, and he never looked back. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't know if he was going to win the nomination, but I did, at the time, believe that he just won the middle of the country. That's what I thought.
Did you, I mean, obviously you come from MSNBC, you were a left-of-center guy over there. Did you have a favorite during the primary? Did Donald Trump convince you right away that he's the guy that you like, or did you like someone in the Democratic primary? Was there anyone you were supporting?
Well, Bernie Sanders is a very good friend of mine, and I still, even though I'm at RT now, and a lot of relations have been severed, and so to speak, disconnected because I'm anchoring the news on RT America, Bernie is still a very good friend of mine, and I did support him. My wife contributed monthly to his campaign. I guess when I got to MSNBC in 2009, I brought Bernie Sanders to cable probably more than anybody else. He was a senator, rather obscure, from the small state of Vermont. And, of course, I was new to the cable world, and so I had Bernie on my radio show numerous times, and so I put him on TV. And the more we put him on, the more I told my team, I said, you got to listen to this guy. I mean, this is where our listeners are on the Ed Schultz radio show. This guy is speaking to the millennial. He is speaking to the younger generation. He is speaking about a future. He's somewhat Kennedy-ish, so to speak. He had a vision for the country. He talked about change, and I thought that he was going to go. And he did. And I thought he was going to take off politically, and eventually it took him years, but he did. And so Bernie is a good friend, and I believe in what he stands for.
Do you still talk to him? Are you still in contact with him?
During the campaign, I interviewed him 4 times, and I have visited with him post-campaign just a few times.
Yeah.
But I haven't talked to Bernie probably in a year.
Uh-huh. And he won't come on your show now?
I haven't asked him. I don't want to put him in that position. I think the Senate has pretty much made an erroneous determination about who we are and what we do and how we function, which I think is very sad. Yeah. And I think that we're just in a different arena as far as what they want to do.
And we'll get into that a little bit. But let me ask you: you left MSNBC in July 2015, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
You started at RT, I think, the beginning of the following year.
I started RT January 1st of 2016. Right. So I was idle in the business. I was doing a podcast. Yeah. I was idle in the business from middle of July until the end of the year.
So my question is, how would you describe working at MSNBC versus RT? What are the differences? What are the similarities?
Well, I appreciate the question. This is the best job I've ever had in my 42 years of broadcasting. It's the best company I've ever worked for. It's the most freedom I've ever had. And I have really grown on the level of international knowledge and foreign relations, which has been very career rewarding. I've been able to travel the world. I've been able to interview
with RT?
With RT. Been able to interview numerous people from different countries that have a totally different perspective than what Americans have. I'm doing real journalism. It's not opinion. I anchor the news. I facilitate a discussion. And I enjoy this role very much. It's really been a real pleasure working here for the last 2.5 years, and I really don't know when I'm going to give it up. I'm enjoying it that much.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, Ed.
But let me go back, if I may, because you said, what are the differences?
Yes.
And I want to make this very clear, and I hope your audience consumes this. There was more oversight and more direction given to me on content at MSNBC than there ever has been here at RT. And I think that it's very sad that that story is not getting out. I think it's many times I was told what to lead with on MSNBC. Many times I was told what I was not going to do, and I've got a story that had I not been involved in it, I would have never believed it. And Phil Griffin, who I consider a friend to this day, was a watchdog, far more than anything I am exposed to here at RT America.
Did he tell you what to say? Did he tell you an angle to take?
Often. In fact, when Bernie Sanders was announcing that he was going to be a candidate for the nomination of the Democratic Party in Burlington, Vermont, I was the only cable host between Fox, MSNBC, and CNN that was there live to cover it. Now, there were live cameras there, but we had coordinated with the Sanders campaign that at 5 o'clock he was going to make his announcement, and we were going to cover this on the Ed Show. I go to Bernie Sanders' house that afternoon, an interview in the backyard, about a 15-minute interview. The grandkids are running around. It's a big day for the Sanders family. He's going to announce that he's running for president. We're going to carry it live later on in the day, and we're going to run this one-on-one tape with Bernie. 3,000 people are there on Lake Champlain. It's 5 minutes to air, and I get a phone call from Phil Griffin, "You're not covering this." I said, "Phil, Bernie Sanders is announcing he's running for president. He's going to be a president." "I don't care. You're not covering this." And it got rather contentious. And
Why, though?
I don't, now you're asking me for opinion. I'm giving you fact right now about what happened. Mm-hmm. And other people who were there with me will attest to the fact and back me up that this is what happened. We were told that we had to cover something down in Texas that was totally meaningless, and another press conference in Baltimore, which was already had been in the news for a few days. We're covering Bernie Sanders live. We're coordinated with his campaign. And I'm told 5 minutes before, "You're not covering Bernie Sanders." Now, let me give you the opinion. I think the Clintons were connected to Andy Lack, connected at the hip. I think that they didn't want anybody in their prime time or anywhere in their lineup supporting Bernie Sanders. I think that they were in the tank for Hillary Clinton, and I think it was managed, and 45 days later I was out at MSNBC. Mm-hmm. And I thought it stunk. They gave me my contract. I signed a non-disclosure agreement and also a no bad-mouthing agreement, which I felt good with, because I thought that this was over time all going to wash out, and I knew if Bernie Sanders didn't win, he was going to run again, because the man is determined. So I was patient and took my money and went on, but the fact of the matter is I think I've got a hell of a story to tell. And when you see how the campaign unfolded, Donna Brazile feeding Hillary Clinton questions at the campaign, the DNC undercutting Bernie Sanders, the superdelegates that were organized by Hillary Clinton. I mean, in my state of Minnesota, where I'm a resident and pay taxes, Al Franken and Amy Klobuchar were superdelegates, and despite the fact that Bernie Sanders won Minnesota, they supported Clinton. It was the fix was in. The fix was in with the mainstream media. The fix was in with managing the news and shutting down Bernie Sanders. And it wasn't until he started matching the Clintons and raising money that he became, well, we got to cover this guy. But from the start, the Clintons didn't want any competition. They didn't want Bernie Sanders around. They didn't want the Keystone XL pipeline. They didn't want to push her on that issue. They didn't want to push her on free education for all, and they certainly didn't want to push her on the TPP and also universal health care. Those were four main issues that Bernie Sanders, had he not been in the campaign, Hillary Clinton would have never had to address. And so I think the fix was in early on to Deep Six Bernie. To this day, it kind of pisses me off because they talk about collusion. Mm-hmm. There's nothing more than collusion than this.
Well, let me go and a little bit and talk a little bit more about Trump.
Sure.
And I'm sure that you've seen kind of what some of the things you said at MSNBC about Trump At one time, you said he was a racist because of the birther thing. In fact, you said, I think Donald Trump is a racist. You seem to have a more favorable impression of him now. What changed?
I do believe he's a racist. I still hold that. But when I'm doing a newscast, that it's not about me giving my personal opinions. And I think when I labeled Donald Trump a racist way back when, I was probably one of the first ones to that fraternity. There's been a lot of people, and there's a lot of evidence since then. And I think we'll just let his action speak for itself and let the people judge. But I do not think.
But have you covered at RT why you think he's a racist?
No, because my opinions don't matter in a newscast.
But there's editorial judgments in every newscast, right? And you do give opinions from occasion. Ed's take.
No, I don't have Ed's take on the news.
I forget what you call it, but there's on
the website, on my Facebook. It's a give me a minute.
Yeah,
that's totally different from doing the news. That's my Facebook. That's my opinion. I don't run from it. Mm-hmm. I don't post it that often. Maybe 3, 4, 5 a month. But no, I still have an opinion of Donald Trump. I think he's had some measurable success as president, but I do believe that he harbors some ill will against minorities, and I think it's played out that way, and I think there's plenty of evidence to support that. Now, when I go on a newscast, obviously that's not in the content, nor is it my position to make people think that, well, this is where Ed is. That's not journalism.
Do you think RT is favorable to Russia? Their newscasts, your newscasts.
Our mission is to give both sides of the story. That's our mission. And when we don't give both sides of the story, then we haven't done our job.
But for instance, you just attacked the collusion hoax.
Sure.
There was a quote from at the time when you were at MSNBC. You were attacking the Republicans. You said, they hate Obama so much they will even embrace the head of the KGB. Putin is their new hero. You said that Russia has a nasty human rights record. Do you still believe that?
I believe that there's no question that there is tremendous friction, and there has been for years, between the United States and Putin. There's no question about that.
Does he have a nasty human rights record?
Well, I think the United States has a nasty human rights record.
Well, does Vladimir Putin have a nasty?
Well, that might have been overboard, but I do think that every superpower on the globe, if I may, every superpower on the globe has a very poor record on human rights.
But Ed, it seems like you want to pivot back to America, and you're not willing to say that you think that Russia has problematic human rights concerns, which most people in kind of the International Human Rights Committee would suggest they do.
Well, but in fairness, and I'm not denying that, but in fairness, I believe that there are superpowers that have a hard time with human rights.
Do you think our system...
I think the fact that Jon Stewart interviewing Barack Obama and asking him about drone strikes and innocent people being killed, and Obama's response was, make me stop. That's a horrible place to be. We have drone people all over the world.
Are you against drone strikes?
I am. Absolutely I am. And that's well documented. I did an interview with Robert Greenwald and said that several years ago with Brave New Films.
So do you think the American system, the checks and balances we have in this country, the imperfect but I think pretty robust democratic institutions that we have, is better than what we see in Russia today, where journalism is often punished? There's a widespread belief that journalists have been killed for challenging Putin, that political opposition has been killed for challenging Putin or imprisoned. Do you see a difference between our system and Russia's system?
I see tremendous similarities between the two systems. I believe that the American people don't understand that what Russia is going through right now is a big political experiment, that Vladimir Putin is trying to make sure that this system of sovereign democracy works in Russia, and that there is still a communist party in Russia that got 11% of the vote, that there is an untold story about the under 40 crowd in Russia. You know what they want? They want to be Americans. They want a home. They want a job. They want health care. They want a better life for their kids. They want to fight terrorism. They want security. The culture of Russia is changing, and that's the untold story in the American media. You can't compare a democracy that's well over 225 years old and one that's not even 30 years old.
Do you consider it a real democracy in Russia right now?
I didn't think we had a real democracy when we started in this country. I think it takes time to evolve to that.
So is that
no, wait a minute now. You just can't parcel it. It's not a yes or no answer. It's far more academic than that, and it's far more detailed than that. I see superpowers in this job far differently than what I used to. I have
Is Russia a superpower?
Absolutely.
Why?
Well, obviously their weaponry, number one. Number two, their relations with other countries around the world, their alliances that they are making. Look how much progress Putin has made around the world. China.
Is it good progress?
Well, they're not shooting at one another.
Supporting Iran, supporting.
Didn't the United States do a nuclear deal?
Why is it always what it? I mean, we can make a case about America,
sure.
But why is it always when I ask you
because
about
America,
Russia, you want to pivot against America?
America is the number one judgment in the world when it comes to a democracy. Now, I think we can agree on that.
What does that mean by that?
Well, it's the most successful democracy on the planet.
Yeah, it's the longest lasting.
It's the longest lasting. It's the most successful. Okay? It offers the most opportunity when it comes to freedom. What Americans don't get is that's what Russia wants.
Is that what Vladimir Putin? How do we know that? What evidence is that he is?
Do you know that in Russia Vladimir Putin is viewed as a progressive Democrat? That's how Putin is viewed by the Russian people.
Well, he controls the media, as Gary Kasparov.
No, he doesn't, because he doesn't control what I say.
Well, you're in RT America. Are you aired in Russia?
Yes. Let me explain, and thank you for asking.
Well, that's a good question.
Because there's a lot of misconceptions. 8 hours comes out of Moscow, 8 hours comes out of London, 8 hours comes out of Washington,
and you're aired
D.C.
live in Moscow.
I'm aired live in Moscow. I'm on at 5 o'clock Eastern and 8 o'clock Eastern.
Can you understand why perhaps they're not worried about you being on the air when you're unwilling in this conversation to staunchly criticize Putin? Why would he be worried about you being on the air?
Why would Phil Griffin worry about me covering Bernie Sanders? Fair question. I've never been told that I'm not doing something on RT 24/7. I've never been told.
There a possibility?
And I think since you're going down this road, I think that you should interview the people that we interview on the air. Interview anybody that's ever come on RT on the news, if they've been instructed what to say, if their microphone has been cut off, if they've been told that they can't come back on, get those people. It's like you're afraid to tell that story.
I'm not afraid.
But why you put it on me? I'm giving you the truth.
I interview people, my podcast guests.
I am giving you the truth. I am telling you that
questions.
And I'm telling you that I am unmuzzled, that I am not muzzled at all.
But is it possible, I'm asking you,
yeah.
Is it possible that you're unmuzzled and not being directed because when they picked you, they kind of understood what they were getting? This is what they kind of wanted. Good
conspiracy theory. Give me a break.
Well, let me ask you,
can
you criticize?
Are you for real? That is a conspiracy theory. You're saying, let me get this straight. You're suggesting that RT America hired Ed Schultz after his run with the mainstream media and a network radio show that played across the country to kind of get a foot in the door to fool people? Is that what you're suggesting?
So there is a well-known...
you're either saying it or you're not. You're asking me if Putin's a nasty human rights record. I'm asking you directly. Yeah. Do you really believe?
And I'm answering you.
Okay.
And so there is a belief, and I'd love your comments on it.
Sure.
That RT has picked up American commentators in order to legitimize, in the eyes of Western viewers, the network, even as they propagandize, and I've seen your shows, Ed. They have a similar theme. America is in dire straits. It's breaking up.
No. That's not my show.
Well,
no. Give me an example. Give me a story.
You often cover shootings in America and things along those lines. Disproportionate.
Let me ask you. Okay. If the kids in Flint, Michigan can't drink the water, is that a story?
Can you criticize Putin on the show?
Yeah. We've then you don't watch the show. Because
I've
we
seen
have
a couple
had
episodes. I mean, I can't.
I
say
do
I've
the
watched it all.
news. I don't opine on Trump. I don't opine on Putin.
What have you criticized about Putin on the show?
That's not my job. My job as a journalist to give both sides of the story. I don't give commentary. I don't give commentary on Trump.
So let me ask you this.
See, you've got this mindset about
and I'm giving you
RT.
opportunity. I do have a view of it, but I'm giving you an opportunity.
Sure.
And have I been fair in allowing you to answer?
I think you have, but I think you've got some assumptions, which is fine.
Sure, I have a viewpoint. Ed.
But you have a viewpoint, but I don't want you to say that, I have a negative view of America because I do the news on RT. That's not true.
Can we go? I did watch the episode on Putin's election on your show, which you covered. You said, how can a man so vilified by the West be so popular with his people? You asked that question. Can you answer that question?
I think that's a good journalistic question.
But can you answer it? Is there an alternative to that? He is, getting 60% of the vote because he's a swell guy.
I think he's getting 60% of the vote because the Russian people feel like he offers them a future that is, number one, stable, a better economy, and a country that's moving forward. That's what I think.
Gary Kasparov would say that when you control the media, when you kind of control the media in Russia, which I know you're pushing back, but most people believe that independent media has been squashed and might exist in a small extent there, but he controls the main networks. It's kind of easy to be a popular figure in a country.
We have people that come on RT and criticize Vladimir Putin quite often.
What do they criticize him for?
All kinds of his policies. They call it Russian aggression. I'm sure you've heard that in the mainstream media. Those terms have been used and not been edited off our newscast or off our network.
If I were to ask you about Crimea, do you believe that...
Oh, I'm so glad you're asking me about Crimea.
Thank you. Please. So do you believe that Russia annexed Crimea, or do you believe it was... would you take the Vladimir Putin line that they were asking for Russian help?
I don't think there's any question about the fact that it was the Crimean people who were Russian nationals who were being butchered and brutalized by a dictator in the Ukraine. Let me finish. And I keep hearing about Russian aggression on Crimea. Ask yourself the question, how many shots were fired? How many people died? Does that sound like an invasion to you? Can you quote the percentage of the people in Crimea who voted to go back to the Russian Federation? It was 95% of the people of a vote that wanted to rejoin. Do we know how Crimea became an independent country under Ukraine? It was given to Ukraine by Nikita Khrushchev after World War II. Why don't I hear this in the mainstream media? Why do I always hear United States senators tell me that this is Russian aggression and he invaded Crimea? When was the last time you saw ABC, CBS, NBC, or Fox, MSNBC, CNN go to Crimea and interview the Crimean people and ask them, did you get invaded?
I'm not here to defend other networks. I think
but I think it's a big part of answering the question.
Let me ask you.
There was no invasion of Crimea.
Well, I think a lot of people would disagree with you, Ed. But let me ask you.
Okay.
Let me ask you a second question. There's been a lot of political opposition.
Did I answer your Crimea question?
Well, I think is what I thought you would answer it as. But yes, you did answer it.
Well, how many shots were fired?
What does that matter?
How many people died?
It was an independent country that Russia came in and helped take over.
No, Russia came in and made sure that Russian nationals were not getting brutalized. Let me ask you a question. And I think the American people need to, as a trial attorney.
Let's continue.
All right.
Do you find it odd? I mean, I know that you say Russia's a superpower like the United States, or just as it does bad things just like the United States does. But there are opposition figures in Russia who have died. It looks like they perhaps were murdered. Many people believe Vladimir Putin was likely behind it. Do you believe any of that?
I don't know anything about that. How would I know anything about that? I don't live in Russia. I don't cover Russia. I cover the news here in America.
But you're saying that you believe the media in Russia is just as robust.
I don't work for the media. I can tell you about my experience, and I can tell you about RT America. That's what I can talk to you about. I can't speak for anybody else's job. I can't speak for, but I take offense when we're told that we're propaganda. I write And
who taught you about Crimea? How did you learn about Crimea? Did you, when you came here, did you meet with people to learn about it? How did that become a subject?
That's a great question. I have a much more worldview today than I did when I worked in the mainstream media in America, because we didn't cover that kind of stuff.
Who
if you'll follow well, I researched it. I've done a lot of reading on Crimea. I've done a lot of reading on.
Did RT give you any articles?
No, they didn't. No. You know what popped my interest is because when I took this job 2.5 years ago, I was told that by people outside that it was propaganda. And I was told by people outside that, Russia is such a bad player and everything else. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to give this a chance. This is a great, I don't have to do this, but this is a great career experience. And so that's really where it was. And I have really learned an awful lot about the world. And I've learned an awful lot, and I've read a lot, and I've studied a lot. And there's a lot more on the face of the earth than the United States. I'm a loyal citizen of the United States. I'm a patriot to the United States. I'm a patriot to journalism and telling the truth and making sure both sides of the story are out there. And both sides of the story are not being told about Crimea. Both sides of the story are not being told about the intentions of the Crimean people. And I think that it has been a real target of the mainstream media in America and the United States Senate to prop up the military-industrial complex and to vilify Russia without really understanding the culture of the people and what they wanted. Now, and I'll use an example. If the Mexican people were brutalizing American citizens in Mexico, I would want the President of the United States to do something about that. Such was the situation in Crimea. And did Putin send forces in there to stabilize things? He did. He sent a police force in there.
So, Ed, it sounds like you think that the American media, who's telling them not to cover that?
I have no idea.
Because
I have no profit.
They are
the ones. Look,
how would that not be profitable? What
you think that? Look at what's going on with Laura Ingraham right now. Let me tell you something. You say the wrong thing, you don't get advertisers. You don't get advertisers, you're not on the air very long. The mainstream media in this country is about one thing. That's making money. They're not about telling the full story. Do you think if they went in and were to present what's going on with the NATO countries and what's really being presented by the United States on foreign policy on a level that if there was a fair conversation, that multinational advertisers would love it?
What is going on in the NATO countries that you think that...
the positioning of offensive weapons. If the United States had Russian weapons on Mexican soil, do you think the American people would be kind of questioning that? We'd have a Cuban Missile Crisis all over again.
What do you think? What do you think?
I think the American mean. I think the American.
Ed, I want to get back to what do you think what do you think the intentions of the NATO countries? Do you think they're trying to take over Russia?
No.
Why?
But Russia certainly isn't trying to take over them. Russia's not going to invade Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania. Give me a break.
Well, those countries seem to be fearful of that.
And why is that? Because they're being told to be fearful because the United States wants all kinds of military hardware there.
Do you think they need
you
to
don't
be
accept any of my answers.
Because I'm asking you a question. Why?
And I'm telling you that there's a bunch of fear mongering going on.
Why do the leaders of those countries, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, need to be told by America to be afraid of Russia? They're from there. They have a better understanding of that area than America does. So they seem to be genuinely afraid. They don't need us to tell them.
Okay.
So why?
Fair enough. But I'm telling you that Russia's not going to invade those countries.
How do you know that? I thought you were a journalist. I thought you didn't have just journalistic opinions.
I do not believe that Russia is going to invade. What evidence do you have to prove that Russia's going to invade those? What evidence do those leaders have to prove? So, you know who's feeding them money?
Ed, can you
wait a minute. You know who's feeding them money? The United States is feeding them money.
So Ed, can you understand why people do wonder why, when you've come to RT, that you've taken what seems like a very robust position defending what many people see as an unsavory government? I mean, you say you don't have opinion, but then when it comes to something about Russia, you have a strong opinion.
Well, I'm not doing the newscast right now.
But
I'm not doing the newscast right now. I mean, I tried to give you an example. You interrupted me respectfully. Obama told Putin that there would not be offensive weapons on the Romanian border, and then he put them there. So trust is an issue between the two countries. Okay, okay, all right. That given.
Well, I don't know if that's true, but if that is true, I'm not sure about that. But what would be? I honestly, I will tell you, I don't know that story. I would say I don't know what the sources are, but I don't know why. But why, Ed?
Let me just say this: a superpower.
Ed, let me just follow. Okay. Why would Obama lie about offensive weapons?
I have no idea.
What intent? Do you think
he was asked
has?
about it, and he said he was concerned. That
why said they were. Do you think they want to invade Russia? Is my question.
Obama told Putin that they were not offensive weapons; that they were there as defensive measures because of the threat of Iran. That's in the news, okay? That's a stated position.
Do you think he has offensive
by the United States?
Why would
I believe that the missile technology of the United States and their placement of missiles in Europe is a threat.
To who?
To Russia.
Why?
Because if Russia were to put missiles on the Mexican border, it'd be the same dynamic. Why do you have a hard time understanding that? Why do you think that that's propaganda when if you're living in Arizona and you've got Russian missiles that are 200 miles from you, would you have some kind of concern? What do you think the Russian people are thinking, that the United States has got missiles 200 miles from their border? So why can't you see that as a journalist?
So Bill Buckley once said, Ed, in the context...
You didn't answer my question.
In the context of... first of all, I'm doing an interview, but let me... So Bill Buckley once said in the context of the Cold War, the Soviet days, there was a story of an American pushing an old lady out of the road and someone pushing an old lady in the road. You don't go around saying they both push old ladies around. The point is, you see these countries as different entities. You see them having different moral purposes. But it seems like you think that America...
I see two... Here's what I see.
You see them as the same.
In many respects, I do. In many respects, I do. Isn't it amazing that two Christian countries can't get along?
Do you think America is a Christian country?
I do. I think we were founded on Christian Judeo principles. Absolutely.
But
I believe that Christianity is the prevailing faith in America. I also feel like there are more senators and representatives that are aligned with the Christian faith. And I believe that we are a Christian nation.
Do you think you have as much freedom?
No, wait a minute. Let me say this. Let me point this out. We have no territorial issues with Russia. We have no natural resource issues with Russia. We have no immigration issues with Russia. We have fewer issues with Russia than any of the other superpowers. Why can't we get along? Fair question? That's a pretty good journalistic question.
Do you not believe, and I saw your newscast on this, and I get the sense that you didn't believe from the questions, that Russia may have killed someone on soil in the UK, that they are trying to destabilize American foreign policy around the world? Is that something you do not believe?
I believe that there's conflict, and there's different views of how a country should be run. I believe that the way the Ukraine was being run was a threat to Russian nationals. That's what and I also believe that the people that the United States has been supporting in the Ukraine have got connections to Nazi groups, and that's why the funding recently.
A lot of articles suggest that is not true.
Then why was the funding cut? Why was the funding cut recently? That's a fair question.
But it does seem to be.
But wait a minute.
Do you have a more positive view of Russia today than America?
Absolutely, I do. Because I do. I have a more positive view of the UK. I have a more positive view of Germany. Because I understand their concerns a lot more.
Do you have a more positive view of Vladimir Putin and Russia today? I know that doesn't work, Russia Today. I don't mean the network. But do you have a more positive view of the Russian government today than you do of the American government?
I do. And I have a more positive view of the American government and Donald Trump than I did before he was elected.
Let me ask you, have you lost any friends since moving to RT? Has this caused friction with some friendships?
No. I mean, are you talking about like friends in my personal life? No.
Or professional friends?
Let's just say that I keep pretty close contact with the people that I worked with on the Ed Show. I have a lot of friends in the business. There's a lot of people that have left MSNBC that I. So no, I haven't. I can't say that there has been a groundswell that don't talk to Ed anymore. He's a pariah because he's doing the news on RT America. I think that one thing that does bother me is not you in general, but the media people. They don't realize that what I'm doing here is far different than what I did on the Ed Show. I mean, I used to open up the show with a 15-minute monologue of total opinion show. I'm nowhere near that now. It's not. I mean, I'm an anchor. I'm a news anchor. That's what I do now. And I just think that there hasn't been a fair recognition that, you know what, they do give both sides of the story. And I guess since I've been here, and I hear what diplomats from other countries say, I don't get enough foreign news in the mainstream media in America. And as soon as a soundbite plays, it's totally against whatever country it is. Have you noticed that about? I mean, how often do you see Sergei Lavrov on any of the networks without being just totally trashed? It's almost as if another country's view is totally pushed aside unless it thinks like the United States. Objectively, that's what I've seen. That's what I see. Look at this trade war that's going on with China right now. I don't think that we're getting their view about why they're upset that Trump is doing this. We just get Trump's view in the mainstream media. Why is that? I don't have an answer for that. Mm-hmm. But I think that there's a real room for covering both sides on this globe.
Let's do a thing I do called name association. I'm going to name a name. Tell me if you know them, what you think of them. If you don't know them, what you think of them. First one is Phil Griffin. I think we kind of went through this earlier.
I like Phil. I think he's a real dedicated employee to NBC and MSNBC. I think he really cares about the product. And I think that when my wife got cancer, Phil could not have been better to me or my family. And I don't consider him a close friend. I considered him a very good a good boss, but he ran the shop the way he ran the shop, and that was it. We didn't see eye to eye on some things. We saw eye to eye on others, but I certainly hold no malice. And if I ever ran into him, I think both of us would probably smile at one another and, how's it going? So I have good feelings about Phil.
Rachel Maddow.
Don't know her. Had some interaction with her, but I really don't know her.
Keith Olbermann.
When I got to MSNBC, I kept being told by everybody how crazy Keith was and just how out of line he was. I never had a crossword with the guy. Keith and I got along just fine.
I always ask this one. I have a feeling that you probably haven't met him, but I ask it because he's very mysterious. I try to glean insight into him, and that's Matt Drudge.
Never met him.
Yeah.
Don't know him.
Roger Ailes.
Met him once at a White House Correspondents' Dinner, and I was walking, and he was kind of standing in line waiting to get in to get his picture taken with the president. He says, I'm the guy. He says to me, I'm the guy you like to pick on all the time. I just laughed. I said, how you doing, Mr. Ailes? Nice to see you. Nice to see you, Schultz. And that was it. That's the only conversation I ever had with Roger Ailes.
I want to go to closing question in a second, but there is one question I wanted to get back to, which
Sure.
kind of goes with name and appearances. I asked you if you ever met Trump. Have you ever met Vladimir Putin? Have you ever had the opportunity to meet him?
I really appreciate that question. I have never met a Russian ambassador. I've never met anyone in the Russian government, and I've never met Vladimir Putin. And I've never interviewed any, since I've been on RT, I've never interviewed any Russian. I've never even spoken with the spokespeople in Putin's office or Lavrov's office. And I have to tell you, that's one of the frustrations I have. I'd love to interview with them.
Let's go to closing questions. These are fun.
Sure.
I ask these of everyone. What historical leader do you most admire?
Well, I think FDR pretty much saved the world. I thought his leadership saved the world. He brought the country out of a depression, which my parents lived through. My parents talked a lot about what it was like living in America during the Depression. And I think he navigated us through World War II, and I think that FDR he was managing an awful lot.
Are there 3 books you can point to that most shaped your worldview?
Straight Talk from the Heartland by Ed Schultz, Killer Politics, and Jonathan Livingston Seagull.
Is there a writer, or are there writers that when you see their byline, you always read their work?
No. Because I think that I think most reporters. Well, I'll just leave it at that. There isn't. There isn't any one reporter that I have to read to feel like I'm in the loop.
And I think I have an idea of where this question will be. But what do you think is the most undercovered issue in the news?
That's a hard question. Probably racial tension in America. There's a lot of things that are undercovered, but I really believe that until we go wall to wall and have the coverage coordinate with, I think, some activism that will lead to possible legislation and lawmaker activity, I think that we're going to be dealing with this for a long, long time. Income divide plays into that. The dwindling middle class in America, the have and have not society that has developed. And so all of those things I just don't think get enough attention. I think in a generic statement, I think the Stormy Daniels things gets way too much attention.
Ed, thank you so much for doing the show.
My pleasure.